Ted, there's no way I can summarize your career. So why don't you just give us a little background, who you are, what have you done in aviation?
Hi, as you said, I'm Ted Schwartz. I graduated from Arizona State University and immediately was commissioned in the Air Force. Went to pilot training for the Air Force and was in for the next 22 and a half years. Flew a variety of airplanes, mostly fighters. Retired from the Air Force in 1989 and did a little consulting work, and especially with a company down in Dallas, an airline crew training company, and did the first turbojet examiner program for the FAA in 737s because the regular examiners had a hard time showing up for the check rides for the airline company. I guess we could say that a little more eloquently. There was a we'll rephrase that and say there was a shortage of inspectors. And then I went to saw a lot of my friends having a lot of fun and not working very hard at Southwest Airlines. So I went there until retirement and was the director of operations for Southwest Jet for a year and a half, and then went to fly Gulfstream until 2010. I promised my wife I'd retire, and that lasted exactly 36 hours until Lockheed Martin called.
You did technically retire, though, right?
So I guess it worked. They wanted me to come fly a test flight with them, and I went out and did that, and I guess it worked all right because about a week later I was at the Farnborough Air Show and flew the next 3 years for Lockheed Martin.
So Ted's done a few things. My experience with Ted was he was actually the guy that first hired me in business aviation when I was, at the regional airline, and I came to the charter operator that he was a director of operations for, and with a shirt and tie on and a resume looking for a job, and they were the ones that ultimately gave me one, got me into this side of the business. So Ted's been a close friend for a long time, and I thought with our previous discussion about retired airline guys coming into this side of the business and how some people view that as good or bad or indifferently, and how we think, it'll probably be a big part of business aviation over the next few years for sure with this pilot situation. So I thought when we talked about that and about the right way to approach it when you're coming from the airlines, Ted came to mind because he approached it knowing that it was very different, but also, utilizing his experience in his past life, putting in a lot of effort to learn about this side of the business to perform, very well as a director of operations. And he knew the rules better than everybody, like he was supposed to, not because he'd been doing it longer than everybody, but because he put in the effort and the work. And it was pretty good to see. So Ted, why don't you kind of tell us about from your retirement from Southwest and then how you ended up flying Gulfstreams and getting in this side of the business?
Well, as retirement was approaching from Southwest Airlines, I had no real plan, no intentions of any particular thing. And one of the guys from Southwest Jet called and said, would you like to come and fly one of the smaller private jets for a celebrity? And I said, well, let me think about that. Went and looked and decided it wasn't really what I wanted to do. So they called back and said, would you like to be the director of operations? And I said, the director of what? And I did not really know much about that. But it sounded interesting, and it was a challenge, so pressed on with it. However, the very first day that I showed up, the FAA POI, the principal operations inspector, showed up at a meeting and said, oh, another blankety blank 121 useless captain. And that was my introduction to the business aviation. But as Max correctly said, it was a steep learning curve, especially to step in as director of operations, which I did not know that much about, but found out very quickly that compliance was the biggest part of that job. And learning all the rules and regulations and going to the various schools was very worthwhile, and learned a lot of things that I had not learned in a lot of military flying, a lot of airline flying. So many things are done for you automatically in the airlines. Just one quick example, at Southwest Airlines, they had a rule if the weather was marginal, then you had to have a second alternate. And marginal was defined as 602. Why 602? Well, I never knew that till I went to the business jet aviation world, and that's the minimums on the back of most of your 10-9 pages.
So when you approached this, Ted, it sounds like you had kind of a specific mindset or an attitude. What was that attitude when you started in business aviation?
Well, throughout my life, I've always been a type A overachiever, although a lot of times my achievements weren't as high as I would have liked them to have been. But that's really the only attitude I could have in that job for the reasons I just said, because they expected me to not know anything, not do anything. But young guys like Max were depending on me knowing what I was doing. So it was a constant and quick learning curve, but very enjoyable at the same time.
So even though you had thousands of hours, prior experience in military and airlines, it sounds like you kind of approached it as, hey, I know I don't know a lot of things about this, but I'm willing to learn.
Exactly. Keep in mind that flying fighters, you come down initial, you come down, fly the runway heading, pitch out and land, taxi off the runway, the follow me truck takes you to the gate. And that's your sum total of responsibilities of getting to the gate. And the airline, a lot of people would like to think that the airline captain job is the most difficult job in the whole world. Well, it's probably one of the most enjoyable and fun jobs I ever had. Yes, sure, you got to keep up with the weather, the fuel, and all the various things. But most things are done for you. You don't have to file a flight plan. You don't have to worry about clearances. You don't have to worry about prior permissions. You don't need to worry about most things that you guys that have accomplished yourselves in business aviation have to do.
Yeah, it's a good point. When you look at the retirement numbers right now in the airlines, I think that there is going to be a large influx of retired airline pilots coming into business aviation. And I think business aviation needs that a little bit because we have so many younger guys leaving for the airline. So it's almost like a very cyclical thing. What would you say to a colleague at Southwest Airlines that was getting ready to retire and maybe pursue a career in business aviation? Is there like one piece of advice that would stand above everything else, or what would you tell them?
Be humble.
Yeah, that's good. It's good advice. It was funny because what Dylan and I were talking about is a lot of these guys say, hey, I'm retiring in a couple months, and they'll put a post on social media somewhere and it'll say, I've got 25,000 hours in B757/67, 737, 727, 747 type ratings and blah, blah. And it's funny because while that's great, and it really is, and it's a lot of accomplishment, you have to know how your strengths pertain to that part of the industry. And so a bunch of Boeing type ratings aren't going to do you a ton of good in this business, but rather a post from the same guy that says, hey, I'm retiring. I've been flying at the airlines for 20 years and want to try and get into the business aviation and continue flying. I'm willing, ready, and eager to learn would probably be a lot more effective of a post, to a lot of people in business aviation, because there is that stigma of the airline guys, versus the business aviation guys, which is silly in the end. And so it's, I think, like you said, it comes down to attitude and people willing to learn, realize it's different, and being humble, realize you're going to have to lift a bag and throw it in the back of the airplane and do some things you were done for you or that you'd never done before. So
I saw a saying online, a guy wrote, he said, retired airline pilots bring a lot to the table. About 50% is useful.
But I wouldn't even venture to say that's the norm. And I'm sure that there's guys like that. But like I said, in my experience with Ted, no matter what, he's always been a very, very humble guy, and won't tell you about all the fighters he flew and, when he was a colonel in the Air Force and all this other stuff. You have to drag that out of him or hear it from somebody else that drug it out of him, because he just says, yeah, I'm the DO of Southwest Jet Aviation. And, he was doing the best he could and he did a really good job. So ran a very tight ship while I was there. And then Ted, I had the pleasure of flying with Ted after that on a G3 for a while. And we had my first trip over the North Atlantic was with Ted. A lot of firsts were with Ted in this business. So I thought it was appropriate we bring him in and tell his story.
Well, to blow Max's horn here for a minute, there's a side of business aviation that certainly in the airlines that you have, well, in the military also, you have to take care of the people. That's job number one. And of course, in the airlines, taking care of the passengers is job number one. But the passengers go away after 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. Your employer in business aviation never goes away.